President Obama is nominating Solicitor General Elena Kagan to the Supreme Court. He's scheduled to make the announcement this morning at the White House. Kagan would replace retiring Justice John Paul Stevens on the bench. If confirmed, the 50-year-old Kagan would be the court's youngest member. She would become the fourth female Supreme Court justice in U.S. history and the third on the court's current bench. She would also be the first justice in nearly 4 decades without any prior judicial experience. A New Yorker who grew up in Manhattan, Kagan earned degrees from Princeton, Oxford, and Harvard Law School. She clerked for Justice Thurgood Marshall before working briefly in private practice. She left to teach law at the University of Chicago, where, according to the Washington Post, she was part of a group that tried to interest Barack Obama, then a part-time constitutional law lecturer, in committing to a full-time life in academia. She eventually joined the Clinton administration, first as an associate counsel and then as a domestic policy advisor. In 1999, Clinton nominated her for a seat on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, but the Republican-controlled Senate never brought her nomination for a vote before Clinton's presidency expired. She joined the Harvard faculty as a professor and was shortly named dean, becoming the first female dean in Harvard's history. Obama nominated her to Solicitor General last year. She was confirmed by a Senate vote of 61 to 31, becoming the country's first ever woman Solicitor General. For more on Elena Kagan, we're joined by 2 guests. Jamin Raskin is a professor of constitutional law at American University's School of Law and a Maryland state senator. He'll join us on the phone from Washington, D.C. And we're joined by Democracy Now! Video stream by Glenn Greenwald, a constitutional law attorney and political and legal blogger for Salon.com. Glenn, you've been writing about Elena Kagan. The announcement come today at 10 a.m. Talk about Elena Kagan as Supreme Court Justice, or what this would mean.
Well, I think that, to begin with, it's very difficult to know what it would mean because she's somebody who has managed to avoid taking a position on virtually every single issue of importance over the last 2 decades. And in order to know what the impact of a Supreme Court nominee will be, it's important not only to assess them in isolation, but also relative to who they're replacing. And there's a very substantial likelihood that Kagan is more conservative than the justice she's replacing, which is John Paul Stevens, which means even if she's a relatively decent person and a good Democrat, the effect that she would have very likely is to move the court to the right. But I think the real issue is we know virtually nothing about what she thinks about anything. She's managed to remain a totally blank slate. She has no experience, not even just not as a judge, but even in a courtroom. I mean, prior to becoming Solicitor General, she was barely ever even in a courtroom participating in any cases before judges. And so it's hard to see how she's going to have the respect of or a good rapport with the other justices on the court, given that her learning curve is going to be so steep. So given all the other excellent alternatives that Obama could have chose, I think this is really quite an atrocious pick, though it remains to be seen if in the confirmation process we learn more about her one way or the other.
Jamin Raskin, thanks for pulling over to the side of the road as you're driving, constitutional law professor at American University. This news just came down that Elena Kagan will be the pick in the last hours. Your response to President Obama's choice?
Well, good morning, Amy. I should start by saying I do know Elena Kagan from law school, from Law Review. She was a year ahead of me. But I'm actually quite enthusiastic about the president's selection. I think that she's got the opportunity to become a great Supreme Court justice in terms of a commitment to civil rights and civil liberties. Her writings about the First Amendment, I think, are absolutely first-rate and exemplary. And I think that when it comes to Bill of Rights issues, I think she will be, an extremely strong justice. And because she was dean at Harvard Law School and made an effort to reach out to kind of moderates and conservatives there, I think she could potentially emerge as a consensus builder on the court and be someone who, forges a new majority of justices who want to push forward in terms of the civil rights and civil liberties of the people. So, I know a lot of her career has been identified with the federal government, and that's, that has been a trend with recent justices. But I think that she brings enormous intellectual strength to the job, and so I'm quite enthused about it.
Let me ask Glenn Greenwald on this issue of First Amendment rights. Jamin Raskin saying she'd make a superb justice. Your response? Glenn. Looks like we've just about lost Glenn. Well, we're going to get him back on, but Jamin Raskin, the issue of the Solicitor General almost being considered the 10th justice, what about that? What role did she play? In fact, she argued about half a dozen cases before the Supreme Court as Solicitor General, arguing for, of course, the government. That's the role of the Solicitor General.
Yeah, I mean, the Solicitor General actually commands a lot of respect among the justices, and so she's had relatively little courtroom experience, but it's been in the place of singular importance, which is the Supreme Court itself. And so I think that she will come onto the court with the respect and the knowledge and the comfort of the other justices. One hopes that she will, have a very salutary effect on Justice Kennedy in terms of opening up his mind and not constantly being pulled over to the right-wing side of the court.
I think we do have Glenn Greenwald back. You hear Jamin Raskin is extremely positive about the potential of Elena Kagan as the next Supreme Court justice. Your response, Glenn Greenwald?
Yeah, there's lots of people who would have really good potential to be on the court. There's lots of really smart people. John Yoo is really smart. David Addington is really smart. Lots of right-wing lawyers are really smart. So the fact that someone's really smart doesn't seem to be a particularly compelling reason to put them as the replacement for John Paul Stevens. Also, this idea that she earned the love of conservatives at Harvard Law School while as dean because she hired a bunch of right-wing professors, almost all of whom were white, as several minority law professors noted over the weekend. She has a horrible record on diversity. Is really quite a silly grounds for claiming that she'd be able to build consensus on the Supreme Court. I mean, hiring right-wing professors at Harvard is a completely different skill than crafting judicial opinions that attract conservative justices on the court, something that she's displayed absolutely no ability to do because her career is completely bereft of any kind of experiences. And I'd like to ask any supporter of Elena Kagan, including the gentleman with whom we're talking, to identify any positions that she's expressed on some of the great issues of the day. What has she said, for instance, about the Bush-Cheney theories of executive power under Article 2, or the ability to circumvent statutes by claiming war powers, or the idea that the whole world is a battlefield and the president can exert war powers? I mean, if you're trying to persuade progressives that she's going to be a good justice, point to specific positions that she's defended and articulated about these issues and about what her approach on the court will be to interpreting the Constitution. What can you point to specifically and concrete beyond just, well, I know her and like her and think she's very smart?
Okay, the gauntlet has been laid down. Jamin Raskin.
Well, but, again, I mean, the point is correct that a lot of people have been nominated to the court from both parties who are pretty closely identified with executive power. And that's kind of an overall historical trend. Elena Kagan is the Solicitor General of the United States, so she's going to be defending the positions of the executive branch in the Department of Justice. And she has not written broadly about the question of executive power or the national security state the way someone like Harold Koh has done. But for just that reason, given the dynamics of this appointment process, someone like Harold Koh is going to have a very tough time getting through the process. And obviously that was a consideration taken into account by President Obama. I wish I could, give more comfort to Glenn on this question than I can. But having said that, I'm certain that she will be a very staunch champion of civil liberties and civil rights on the court, and would expect her to be with the liberal justices on the most important questions dealing with the rights of the people. And as to the other stuff, we just have to see how it evolves and to push things as much as we can to try to restore a proper balance among the branches and make sure that the prerogatives of the legislative branch are respected in the United States. But short of that, no, I can't bring much consolation on that point because we just don't know.